Yeah, like I said, my name is Marcus Degerman, and I work at Softhouse Consulting. Yeah, one of the sponsors. I work as an Agile coach, and I usually say that I help organizations solve problems together, and that is kind of what I try to do most of the time. And why I say together and solve problems, basically I go into an organization, I help them become more agile, I go into a project, make sure it kind of delivers faster, or kind of help them resolve some problems along the way. But most of the times I don't have all the solutions, I don't have all the answers, but I can help people talk, I can help people bring out the conflict, have good conversations about it, and make sure it moves forward. So that's what I'm trying to do. And one thing I do a lot is give workshops, I give courses, and also hold a lot of meetings. And what I've noticed is that meetings in themselves are quite hard, but then when you have distributed meetings and you're not in the same room, it gets even harder. So that's what I want to talk about today. And what this comes from is basically because we're distributing our organizations more and more. They're becoming more global, we're spreading them out all across the globe for different reasons. Also our projects, we're not having kind of trying to deliver a project from one country at a time, but we have teams in different countries, they need to be able to align. And we also have teams in themselves, where we have kind of one or two people in one country and other people in other countries, or people start working from home in different ways. And all of this requires this kind of distributed meetings, that we actually can have good meetings, good workshops, and actually collaborate in a way where we're not in the same room. This is from a study a few years ago. I kind of like it because they asked, kind of checked with managers and asked them, so how much time do you spend in meetings? And on average, managers spend more than 50% of the time in meetings. They also said that 50% of the meetings were a waste of time. And also a study from the UK, I think it was, where white-collar workers were asked, how much time do you actually work per day? And they said an hour and a half on average. The rest of the time they spent in meetings and actually checking emails. So they had about an hour and a half left each day for kind of the productive work they were supposed to be doing. So we're having kind of a huge meeting problem in itself. And then we add the concept of not being in the same room and having kind of bad connections along the way, it makes it even harder. But one thing I've noticed is that when you have distributed meetings, they are much more exciting because stuff can happen that never happens at all in normal meetings. This was a few months ago. I was sitting in a meeting. We had one guy sitting in Copenhagen and one woman in the UK, and I was in Lund trying to kind of coordinate the meeting. There were a few other people as well along. But we were sitting there talking, discussing, and suddenly the guy in Denmark says, I think someone is breaking into my neighbor's house. This is, by the way, the face that I had when I heard this comment. And we kind of asked, what's happening? And he said, well, two people are walking on the back of my neighbor's house, their hood is up, and they're looking into the windows and checking the door. And we said, shouldn't you call the police? And he said, no, I'll go check it out. And we're going, no, call the police. And he said, no, I'll go. And we kind of hear him move up from his chair, kind of walk out the room. We hear a door opening, closing, and it was complete silence in the room. We just sat there kind of trying to listen as much as possible, trying to get, okay, what is happening? And I remember in my head going through these kind of thoughts. The first thought was, how long should I wait until I call the police? The second question was, how do I call the police in Denmark? I'm in Sweden. And the third question was, what is his address? I have no idea where he lives. So this kind of panicky thoughts going into my mind, and suddenly we hear someone walking back again, and then we hear him kind of sit down, and he said, oh, no worries, it was my neighbor's son. He had left his key at home, and it was cold, so he had pulled up his hoodie. And we were going kind of, yeah. But this would never have happened if we just had a meeting in a regular room, kind of sitting in our office. So distributed meetings can be more exciting, things will happen along the way. There are three types of distributions, as I think of it, and it causes three types of problems. One is the time zone difference, which causes one type of problem. The other one is distribute people. We take a team, some people will sit in one space, and other people will sit in another space or country or room. And the third one is actually when we spread out competence. So maybe we have a development team in one country, we had the product owner and project management in another country. Or we separate, so we have one team working on maybe system A in one country, and we have system B in one and system C in another. And this causes different types of problems. So the 3 challenges we have here is that time zone means that we have very short time that we actually can sync and talk to one another. So the overlap is very little. When we start spreading out people, we get the challenge of just alignment between the groups. Because if people sitting in different rooms, we don't have this kind of normal kind of day-to-day conversations. And the last one, when we start spread out competence or different kind of roles, is that we lose this kind of understanding as well. Because if you have people, if you have product ownership, product management in one team, in one country, and you have kind of the development team in another, they will want to talk about different things, and you don't have this kind of day-to-day conversation. So there's a big risk that they spread out and start as losing the understanding between one another. And also, if you have this kind of silo thinking with different systems in different teams and countries, then you have the understanding problem with kind of, do they actually understand what each other are doing? So, the 3 needs that we actually need to address. Because of the time, because if we have a little short time that we actually can sync, we must make sure that the meetings are effective and actually talk about what we should be talking about, what is most relevant now. We shouldn't spend time on things we could solve by email or other things, or chat or other things as well. The other one is that we make sure that we're aligned. Are we working towards the same goal? Are people doing what they need? Are we synced in a good way? And the third thing is to actually make sure that the meetings are relevant. Are we talking about things that people in the meeting actually care about and actually have a comment on? Because they're so easy to just invite everyone to a meeting instead of thinking about, okay, who should I actually invite to actually can contribute to this topic along the way? So, the rest of my talk, this was just kind of an introduction, getting into the feeling, but I will share a lot of examples of how I worked with this. So I will concrete kind of workshops I've done, meetings I've run, and how I did it, so kind of get some concrete ideas and inspiration. And I will add some models and framework because I think it's fun. So, that will be the basis of the talk. Yes, the first one. This was an evaluation of Agile transformation. The teams were kind of distributed. Most of them were situated in kind of one city, but we had a few kind of distributed. And we had changed, and we worked for about half a year with the new organization, and we said, okay, now we need to kind of evaluate this in a good way. So what we did was that we managed to get most of the people actually into the same room. We flew them in, and we got everyone there, except one. So suddenly we had a big challenge because suddenly we couldn't do a normal workshop, and we had this, and I was thinking, should we just skip him? Say, okay, let's just leave him outside. Okay, he couldn't come, so he can't join, because it would be so much easier to do a good kind of evaluation if everyone was in the same room. But then I thought, okay, let's try. Let's see if we can incorporate him in a good way. So this required quite an extensive planning. I think I spent 4 whole days to get everything set up to actually make it work, but it was worth it in the end. So what we did was basically, we put him on one laptop so he could actually be moved around. We assigned one guy to basically be the holder of this guy. So basically make sure that he could be moved around the room and be part of all the different discussions along the way. And also on the laptop there was a camera, so you can basically see in front of him what was happening. So we had one camera there. The other camera I set up so we actually was over the room, so you actually could switch the camera view because we set up a conference call, so you can actually see the overview of the room and see everyone there. So you could see what was in front of him basically, but you can also see what was happening in the entire room. And also then to be able to make sure that he could actually follow what was happening, what was the kind of the discussion that we had and the instructions, I made sure to share my screen along the way. So it was up on the wall with a projector, kind of like this, and then it was shared to his screen. So he could actually switch between 3 screens at all times, so you can basically see what was happening in front of him in the group he was currently in. He could see the entire room and actually what was on the beamer. And so that was kind of a way to just get him in. But then we had the challenge of how can we actually have discussions so he can actually see what was happening. So, but I thought this can go actually possible if we use big markers, because then he can see what's written. So we had some extra big post-its. Everyone was instructed to write big and kind of legible so he can actually read the post-its. If he wanted to write the post-it, he just told his kind of the carry-around person to actually write them for him. And we used some walls, and then we just placed his computer on a kind of a chair so he can see the wall. And if we noticed that it was kind of a bit too messy to see with the camera, then we quickly just took a photo and just sent it to him through the chat. So I had a lot of work, and I basically ran around the entire time to get this working, but it actually worked. And we also actually had some one-on-one sessions where they talked in pairs. And then we just connected a headset to the person he was supposed to talk to, and then could have a normal conversation with that person. So actually it was possible to do this kind of completely kind of normal workshop with all the post-its, writing, drawing, and he was actually quite involved as well. And so I just told this because I thought it was kind of fun. And also it's a way of actually showing that you can make a lot of things if you just want to involve everyone. Another fun thing that happened during, it was a 3-hour session we had, and in the middle we were supposed to give cake. And I realized the evening just before that, oh my God, so Matt won't get a cake. So I actually contact him and say, okay, we're going to give cake. Can you please bring your own cake and I will do something fun with it. And so when we got to the break, then I just said to everyone, and I put him up on the screen so everyone could see his face, and I said, so we're going to have cake. And I said, Matt, did you get the cake at FedEx to you? And he said, yes, of course I did. And he just brought it out. And everyone was kind of, can you FedEx a cake to the US? Are you allowed to send food? Yeah. And actually, I kind of regret it afterwards, because the only questions I got after this workshop was, how do you send food to the United States? And I had to tell him, so it was a joke, come on. Well, yeah. But it was actually a way to just kind of make him feel a bit more comfortable and involved, because he was such a long distance away. So he was part of the joke. So it was kind of fun. And so this was one big, and just to show you what's actually possible if you just put in the effort and a bit of planning. What you can see here is one focus I had here was kind of how can he see the visualization, how can we actually get this working along the way. So what I want you to do is try something. I want you all to play Tic Tac Toe with the neighbor next to you, but you're not allowed to write anything down. You're just supposed to play Tic Tac Toe, kind of 3 in a row, with the person next to you by just talking. So you have 30 seconds now. Try to play a game with the person next to you. So please go ahead. So you're cheating over there. You're not allowed to write anything down. Okay, thank you. So, do we have any winners? Can we raise your hand? Do we have any winners? Good. Good. So, how difficult was this? Was it easy or was it hard? How was to remember where everything was placed? It was too hard, yes. Someone needs to take a phone call here, so that's what. Yeah. So, the point about this, how many of you have been in a meeting where you discuss something more complicated than tic-tac-toe without writing anything down? Oh. Or kind of using a whiteboard to show actually what you were discussing or talking about. So, yeah. And this is the kind of point. I tried to just point this out with tic-tac-toe. That we're trying to do tic-tac-toe in so many meetings without kind of visualizing it, showing it to everyone what we're actually talking about, helping people remember what we discussed before and actually what the topic was, and when we're trying to solve some really complicated problems or complex problems to kind of connect back to the Kinevin framework. So this is kind of the point here. And when we're in the same room, it's a bit easier because we can actually show with our hands, with our bodies, what we're talking about. We can easily write on a whiteboard. But when we go to distributed meetings, then we have the challenge again of kind of how do we actually communicate this. And we're just going to give you a very kind of simple example. And one of the most easiest things I do the first thing I do when I start kind of a distributed meeting is just to open a Word document, share the screen, and then start writing down what we're actually talking about. It's very simple. It takes about 5 seconds. And when you do this, and also I put it up on the projector. You can actually do this in any meeting you're in, if you want to. by just kind of writing down kind of what are the questions, what do people say for comments, and it's very easy also to add kind of, okay, what we decided one thing, you just mark it out kind of with bold or an underline. So you actually finish your meeting notes at the same time during the meeting. And this also helps because if people are on a bad connection, and it's easy to kind of just, okay, make sure that people understand what was being said, and we kind of remember what was being said. And also, if you're on a really bad connection, if you use kind of Google Docs or something similar, then they can actually type it in themselves what their ideas are. And then you can easily kind of collaborate about these things. You don't have to use Word. You can easily kind of just do it in a mind map if you prefer that or something else to make it a bit more visual. This is a simplified version of dialogue mapping developed by Jeffrey Conklin. I can recommend that book. It's a very good book on kind of how to make better meetings along the way. But this is just kind of a simple tool. And just by using this kind of thing, I've solved a lot of problems kind of when we are kind of in different sites, just by show what are we actually talking about. And also another thing that will happen that you can notice, if you start writing down all the questions that are actually asked during a meeting and all the answers you get, you will probably notice that I would say 70 to 80% of all the questions asked during a meeting will never be answered. So it's something to also kind of evaluate, have we talked about everything we need to talk about? So, let's see what happens next. Yes, okay. And just to connect onto this, how can you do retrospectives when you're actually kind of in different rooms? What I do, most of the time I use Google Sheets. You can use whatever you want, but it should be possible to actually type things in for all the team members. And what I usually do is kind of do a quick retrospective, talking about kind of information exchange or decision-making, problem-solving, and actually have them kind of rate. From a scale from 0 to 5, how satisfied are you with this? Everyone just types this in by themselves, and then we can just see the average and the difference. And then we start talking about, okay, can you find some good examples and bad examples of this? And we start talking about these kind of questions. And then that means it's easy to kind of talk about this. We can fill it in. Everyone can write in their examples. It's a way to visualize. Just want to share what this model comes from because I think it's an amazing model. This is called Team Debrief, developed by a researcher called Kimberly Smith-Jensch. You should Google her. And what she found was that in many kind of situations and organizations, they do debriefs or retrospectives or whatever you want to call them. But what she noticed was that most of them did not have any effect at all. And what she found was that what you need to talk about is teamwork and not task work. So the teams that actually talked about how do we actually collaborate in a good way, how can we actually improve the way we actually work together, they improve. The people who talked about their tasks, how can we become better at doing our tasks, they did not improve that much. So if you do kind of a team debrief or retrospective in the correct way, then your team will improve. But if you do it in the wrong way, you can just skip it if you want to. And the model she found, and this is actually from her studies from the US Navy, she found that the 4 things they should talk about was information exchange. How do we share information in a good way? Do we talk about the correct things? Communication delivery. Do we actually understand one another when we're talking? This is directly connected on the Navy. You're talking on the kind of the radio and these kind of things. Supportive behavior. How do we actually help one another? How do I actually say, if you need help, how can I actually say okay, do you need help? And how do I actually ask for help in a way and give feedback? And the last one was initiative and leadership. I tried to translate this into a more agile way of working. So I usually talk about information exchange I've kept, but I also talk about, okay, how good are we at making decisions and problem solving? Does it take a long time or short? Support and feedback. Do we support one another? Do we give one another feedback? And how good are we at prioritization and more kind of long-term work? So those are the things I usually focus on. But I usually use this kind of just very simple sheet. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's easy, but it's simple to write things in. And the next fun one is actually how might we improve? So when we talked about all the challenges and what's working well, just have people fill this in. And this, you can actually, I usually do this with kind of trying to separate the group. Even if we're a group of kind of 6 people doing the retrospective, when I come to this point, I divide up the group. And it's very easy to do. For this team, I had 3 people in the same location, and then 3 people kind of spread out all over the world. So what we usually did when we did retrospectives here was that I had these 2 people stayed in the kind of meeting room we had booked, and talking to one person here. And this guy, he just went back to his computer, connected up, and had a short conference call with these 2. And then they talked, and they just filled in their ideas for how we might improve. and they got about 10-15 minutes for this. And then when we got back to the meeting, then we talked about, discussed, and then started prioritizing and kind of find this is what we should do. So it's very easy to kind of separate this up. And the reason I do this is that having 6 people talking in a meeting, you will have some people being quiet. So you should actually divide them no matter what. But also, when people are kind of connecting in, it's even harder to get a good conversation going. So keep the groups as small as possible. And then in the end, when we have filled this in, we just try to find kind of one change that we can do and kind of define that in a good way so we can work better. So this is kind of just one way to do a small retrospective. But it's possible to do this in a really big retrospective as well. And this was actually Tuesday, this week, I did this retrospective. We had 10 people on site, and we had 5 people actually spread out in different countries along the way. So how can I do a retrospective with them? So what we did was we used the same kind of framework, the same kind of questions, but talking about kind of, this is actually 3 teams that are working together. So what we did was I booked actually 3 meeting rooms for this one. So we had one big room where we started, but I had divided them into smaller groups beforehand and sent a meeting invitation to them as well at the same time. So we started in this big room. I explained kind of what we were supposed to do. I gave them access to the sheet they were going to go. And then they just went, we divided up the groups. 2 of them connected into meeting room 2, 1 to 3, and 1 stayed here with 1. I think that turns into 5. No, it doesn't. And then the other one, people spread out, and then they started having a workshop, and I just had to kind of run between the rooms and kind of just check what was going, ask some more questions, and kind of keep the meeting running. But if I had tried to have a kind of a meeting with 15 people, where 5 connected in, and we tried to have a conversation, it would have been a really sucky kind of 1-hour experience, because we would actually try to keep 15 people talking at the same time if we are in the same room. It will be a bad meeting. So what I did now, I kind of just divided it down so they actually had smaller groups who can actually discuss, talk, and actually have a kind of good meetings. And then we, at the end, we just connected back in the big room, started talking and prioritizing, and then we had a good solution in the end. So just to share you kind of different ways you can do this. It also requires you to kind of book up most of the meeting rooms of your company, but that's fine. And just to connect in, one thing I do in many meetings, and this works all the time, let's see, check the clock, yes, is to actually have people, if I have a question, I just ask them, okay, take 1 minute to think by yourself. And then talk in pairs, and then we connect into the big group as well. This allows people to think for a bit, it allows to kind of share and kind of improve the idea and then move on. And you can do this in a distributed meeting as well. So think by yourself, it's very easy to do. In pairs, you just ask them, okay, can you 2 connect for 5 minutes and talk about this? Can you 2 connect? So it's very easy for them to just connect, have their Skype conversation by themselves, and you can just call them in after 5 minutes again, because they will still be connected to the big chat. So it's easy to do these kind of things to actually improve your meeting as well. Another thing I've noticed, it connects back to a bit to the speaker this morning, is try to be super clear with your meeting invitations, especially if people are not in the same place and they're spread out. You need to be extremely clear. This is actually one meeting invitation I had for a meeting I had a while back. So basically, what is the goal of the meeting? Kind of a quick sentence, what is the problem? What is the output from the meeting that we should get? And also, I usually add this part about roles in the end as well. So, I was there, I was the facilitator. But then just pointing out, okay, Mary is there because she's the product owner, and Sophie and John is there because they know the software requirements, the customer service requirements in this case. So, and just pointing out and saying why people should be there, they can say, okay, I'll come because I'm the best, or they can say, oh, no, you should talk to someone else because they know this better. So it's a way of actually validating this. And this also connects into kind of what creates a good team in the end. So the research by Susan Whelan basically says that for have a good team, have a good structure, make people feel kind of safe and secure and actually produce something, they need a clear goal, clear roles, and a clear structure for how to achieve it. So I can recommend, if you haven't read Creating Effective Teams, you should immediately. So this is just kind of something to think about in each meeting or for each team. Is it valid? There are 2 things you should try to fix. If you have any distributed teams or organizations, it must be extremely quick to connect to everyone. In the meeting rooms, it must be quick to connect up so you can start the meetings directly. but also make sure it's easy to connect from the desk so people actually can talk to one another. If this doesn't work, then you nag and complain until it does. And because I've been in some companies where you don't understand it, but we started a campaign basically saying every time we had a problem with any, I can't remember if you use Skype or whatever we want. Every time we had a problem, we sent in the ticket to the support. So after every meeting, we had something we couldn't hear one another, or it took some time, we just sent in a ticket. And we kept doing that over and over and over again until they fixed it. Because when we just complained once or twice, it kind of just got lost. But then when suddenly they had 150 tickets on it, and then suddenly they did something about it. So my suggestion is, if it doesn't work, nag, basically. So to just come to an end, I had some comments here, which I think some things. If you want to know more, I really recommend creating effective teams and dialogue mapping, as I talked about. But also this one, the Modern Meeting Standard, or read this before our next meeting. It's a very provocative kind of book on how to make better meetings. And to do some self-promotion, I'm publishing a book called Solve Problems Together at the end of November, so you should get that as well. Yes. Yes, those are the things. To summarize, make sure you visualize. Make sure you can see what the ideas, what everyone are talking about. Make sure you don't talk in big groups. Make sure there are clear goals, roles, and structure for the meeting. And also make sure that you plan the process. It takes time. And especially if you have kind of if you have 10 people in a meeting for 1 hour, it means it's 10 working hours. And you can spend at least that planning that, so it makes sense to spend that time. I want to give you one final trick to make sure you improve. And this is one thing I actually end most of my meetings with. To just ask, so on a scale from 0 to 5, how satisfied are you with this meeting? And I just ask people to hold up their hands. And that actually works in distributed meeting as well, if they're connected on camera. And what I usually do is I check and I see, okay, one person said a 2. Then I just ask the person, okay, what makes this a 2? And then I get the comment. And then I said, okay, you said a 4. You had the highest one. Why was it a 4? And you can just show off, okay, what was the challenge? And then I got some quick feedback. It takes 1 or 2 minutes. So to try this out, so on a scale from 0 to 5, how satisfied are you with this presentation? Okay, we have 5. Okay, 4. Okay, what makes it a 4? Yeah. So this is a very simple, quick tool. So thank you, and I might have time for 1 or 2 questions.